In this segment of Neurons on Fire, we're going to look at the study skill of test taking. So probably the first thing that we should talk about with reference to tests are, why are they important? Well, first of all, are they important? And then if so, why? And of course, tests are important. Tests aren't the be-all end-all of everything, but they are a type of a measure of some of the things that you have done in terms of preparation. They're a measure of, yes, they're also a measure of your test taking skills and how much you review things that you don't do well in the past and that you work to improve to change your weaknesses to strengths. And they are in some ways a measure of how much you know in a course, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean if you get a terrible grade in a test, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know information. It could be that you have poor test taking skills. But tests are some form of a measure of what you know and are able to do in a course with reference to certain knowledge and skill sets. Now, on a practical level, of course, your test grade is going to be an overall part of your entire grade for a course. And not only does the grade matter for the course, but the grade also matters for your overall GPA. And the GPA, of course, is part of your permanent record, which goes on your transcripts. And this affects several different levels, okay? So it can affect your academic standing and your financial aid standing. So in the academic standing, there are things called probation and suspension, and the same things occur in financial. With the financial aid office, there's probation and suspension. And part of those rules and regulations are tied to your GPA. So it's important to keep your grades high. Also, you should keep in mind that the grades that you get are of interest to future employers. Like when they look at your transcripts, it can be a future interest, of course, if you're going on for higher education and you plan on continuing for your master's or your PhD. So graduate school looks at them definitely. If you're ever considering scholarships, for example, that comes into play. And then even things like insurance companies might be interested in the grades that you get because it's an indication of your preparation and what you put into things. So keep that in mind. But I also want you to keep in mind that test taking is not just about the knowledge, but it's also about other things, okay? So really, taking a test is a little bit like a game, and I've always seen it that way my whole life, and your goal is to get the maximum points possible on any particular test. And how do you do that? Well, it comes down to three things: preparation. How well have you prepared? How well have you taken notes? How well have you read? How well have you organized your study materials? How well have you reviewed those study materials? What are your, rehearsing and memorizing skills like? So all of the study skills that we've talked up to this point come into play with preparation. But it's also about your test taking skills, like how well do you take tests? It's what we call test smart. It's not just what you know or how intelligent you are, but it's also how well you take tests. And if you master the skills for getting as many points as possible, well then of course your test scores are going to be higher. And the third component of your test grade is your previous test feedback. So once you get a test back, you don't just, cram it in your backpack and never look at it again. You have to look for feedback from your professors, and that gives you information on what you're missing and what you do well on, so then you can come up with a strategy to change things. So you have to be self-aware, and if the things are working, you keep doing them, but if things aren't working, you need to come up with a strategy to change them. I think we can all agree that there's an art and a science to learning, but there's also an art and a science to taking tests. And we already mentioned the fact that taking a test is a lot like playing a game. Now, I want to tell you guys just a little bit about me. Am I the most brilliant person on the planet? Am I a genius? Does everything come so easy to me? No. But I am going to tell you something about me, and that is that I've gone through a lot of schooling: elementary, middle, high school, college, graduate school, master's, PhD, postgraduate hours. And I've spent a lot of time in an educational setting. And I like to learn, okay? But I'm not brilliant, and I'm not a genius, and things don't come easy for me. Some things come easy for me, but a lot does not come easy for me. Yet, I have never scored anything below an A in any of my courses. Now, again, I'm not telling you that to, blow my own horn and toot my own horn or anything like that. I'm telling you because there's a strategy involved, and I learned that strategy very early on in school, and it helped me. It helped me all the way through, okay? So I actually usually love taking tests, and yes, that's a sign that I was completely a nerd, but it was also a sign that I figured out how to play the game. And when I play a game, I like to win. I like to win a lot. I'm not competing with anybody else, really. I'm competing with myself. And I will put in place things that are necessary to win. I will put in time, distributed learning. I will put in hard work and effort, and I will put in effective strategies to win. Okay. Now, when I fall down or I don't get something, that I retweak it and I come up with a better strategy so I can win. So we have to approach this process with a plan so we can shine on test day. And while I was sometimes nervous, definitely, some classes more than other classes, but usually I actually approach the test as kind of like something fun. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but while you're studying, the studying process was hard and frustrating and sometimes long and tedious. But I found a way when I would figure out the strategy, or I figure out a way to be successful in it. By the time that I would take the test, my confidence was built up, not only in the preparation of all the things that I had done, but also the study skill strategies and the feedback from my instructors and the feedback just from the test itself. So when I would take the test, it was a way for me to then shine and to show, I guess, the instructor how much I knew, but it was more about showing myself. So the process of taking a test was really empowering to me, and it built my confidence up quite a lot. So I want you to try to change, I guess I'm trying to show you your perception of taking tests. Instead of looking at it as a nerve-wracking experience, look at it as a chance for you to empower yourself, to build confidence, to build knowledge and skills, and to show yourself how darn good you are at everything. Not at everything, but at this particular skill set. So just like before when we talked about reading, note-taking, organizing, rehearsing, and memorizing, just like when we talked about those study skills, when we talk about test-taking skills, there are also 3 different time periods when you can work on your test-taking skills: before, during, and after. And what I'd like you to do is read in your textbook. There are some really good strategies overall, but especially in the during process, right? It's really detailed information, so please make sure you read those and try them out. Try to see if you can do a new strategy and if it helps you any in your outcomes and your experiences. I just want to share a couple of strategies that I use during each of these periods. So in terms of before, it's really important to prepare yourself physically and emotionally, okay? Of course, it's critical because you want to make sure that you're well rested, that you have, food and hydration. You don't want to be distracted by anything like being tired or you're hungry. I also find it really important to kind of deep breathe and relax during a test, right? You don't want to be uptight. You don't want to be all stressed. And I also find it useful to have kind of a mantra or an affirmation. So before I would take a test, I would stop looking at the materials, obviously, right before the test. For like 2 hours before the test, I wouldn't look at anything. And when I was ready for the test, I would say to myself, it's showtime. Let's do this. Because remember, I saw it as a game, a performance. You can also say something like, I've got this in the bag, right? So just keep saying it over and over to yourself. So preparing yourself physically and mentally. Also, of course, before, nothing beats preparation. So all the study skills we've already talked about, right? About reading your materials, about taking good notes, about organizing your study materials, about reviewing and rehearsing. All of those come into play now. Nothing beats being well prepared, okay? So definitely those are 2 strategies I use before. What do I do during? Okay, there's something called previewing the test. I can't tell you how many of my friends would not do so well on a test because they wouldn't kind of scan through it and read all the instructions. Don't just start. It's really important to get a sense of what's going to be going on in the test, and you sometimes even need to kind of budget your time a little bit, kind of figure out, like, are the essays worth more than the multiple choice? You might even go to that section and start on that section. The other thing are the instructions are really important because they may be telling you certain very specific things that you need to be doing on the test, and you may be completely unaware of them as you take the test. So definitely preview and read all of the instructions. Then other things, your textbook talks about answering different kinds of test questions. There are true-false questions, there are multiple choice questions, fill in the blank, short answer questions, there are essay questions, right? And there are all sorts of different strategies for each of those types. And I really think it's important for you guys just to kind of slow down and study those out, especially there's a difference between when conditional and unconditional words are used in a sentence. And it's really easy to get confused on a test if they're, double negatives and conditionals and unconditionals. But if you know the rules for whether something is, true or false, depending on if there's a conditional and unconditional word, it really does help you out. Another thing that I take in consideration when I'm taking a test is if you get stuck, move on. And that's really important for several reasons. One, time management. Two, it's important because sometimes we get it in our head that we're perceiving we're not doing well. And so instead of dwelling on something you don't know, move on to things that you do actually know. So definitely move on. And another thing is make sure that every question by the end you put some kind of an answer. Usually instructors do not take off for wrong answers, so it always is a good idea to at least guess, especially for things like true, false, and multiple choice. It's so quick. After taking the test, you definitely need to do a few things. Number one, if the instructor has given you any feedback, like students just usually look at the grade and throw the test in their bag. No, if there's feedback, especially about short answer or essays, and the instructor gives you actual comments, use those because that can inform the next time that you take a test or if you write an essay or something like that. And you also want to analyze the kinds of questions you missed. Are you missing a certain type of question? Are you getting confused by conditional or unconditional words? Are you getting confused by double negatives, right? And so there's something you can do called analyzing your errors. And your textbook actually has something called a test debriefing, which will help you prepare for the next test when you're identifying things that are not working on this test.